What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives. It fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high. Clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times. And they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue. So there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you from Lockhart, Texas. As always, today, I've got my friends, two guys that have both been on the show before, not together. It will be Alex Braszko and Jonah Martin. And let me tell you how this episode came about. These guys were both panelists, if you will, along with our friend Nicholas from Orthodox Reflections in my last Patreon Zoom call. And the discussion was based around prepping for what is to come. And I've got a lot of brilliant people in this Zoom call, I can tell you that. And many of the regulars that attend these Zoom calls monthly told me this was the best one we've had yet. And so I thought, well, if you true hardcore Counterflow listeners loved it so much, I think the broader audience will like it too. We're going to talk about prepping from an Orthodox standpoint. It's not the crazy prepping that you might think of when you hear that term prepper. There's a lot of deeper aspects that we get into here. And boy, right off the top of the bat, Jonah Martin gets into how man was created, how the earth was created, et cetera, and why that has to do with how we need to look at prepping in the future. And it's one of the best rants. It's not a rant, it's a subtle explanation, but in this kind of business, sometimes we call those rants. It's just beautiful. And it's the cosmology of Christ, how man was created. And I've never heard it said so articulately and so beautifully. So I think you'll like this right off the bat. It's pretty captivating. And I guess let's just get into it. You guys probably know Jonah and Alex. If not, they're going to give you their little intros right off the top of this episode. Let's get to it. My friends, Alex Braszko, Jonah Martin, welcome, guys. How are y'all?
Good. Thank you, Buck. Doing great.
Good. Well, you've both been on separately, and I know the exclusive Patreon supporter Zoom club. They all know who you guys are because you're in just about every meeting each month. And I should say for my audience, the last one we did involved Alex and Jonah and our friend Nicholas from Orthodox Reflections. He was not able to join us here tonight, but we did this Zoom call with my Patreon supporters talking about some of the stuff we're talking about here tonight. And many of the guys and girls that were regulars that are there every month said, this is the best one you've ever done. And so I thought, if it was that valuable to the core supporters, I think the larger audience would find some value in this. So having said all of that, Alex, I'll let you intro yourself, talk about what you do, and then we'll let Jonah do the same.
Okay. Thanks, Buck. So Alex Braszko. My background, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. I was military intelligence and space operations for about 22 years. Most of the work that I did in the military was focused on integrated joint special technical operations, which doesn't mean anything for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But for those who know what it is, very technical types of work. Following that, went work for Kansas City, Missouri as a Chief Innovation Officer for Kansas City, Missouri. That was under Mayor Sly James, and then Quentin Lucas as well. And then following that, I ended up working for the Center for Army Lessons Learned as a military analyst. So that's a little bit of my background. And Buck, I know you love this part, but because of where I've worked and what I've done, I do have to say anything that I say tonight is my own personal opinion, doesn't represent the Army or the Department of Defense.
Yes, and the loyal listeners to this show will appreciate where you go to church as well.
Oh, yeah. So I'm blessed. Father Turbo Qualls is my spiritual father, and I do attend St. Mary of Egypt Orthodox Church in Kansas City, Missouri.
Excellent. Jonah?
Yeah, good to be back. Everything I say is a wild speculation and cannot be proven or denied by anybody. I live in southern Iowa. I was a ship captain for a number of years in the East Pacific, up and down the coast. We've got a farm in Iowa. We've got a bunch of goats and ducks, and we've had pigs and rabbits, and website where we sell stuff. And I manage St. Nicholas Press, Orthodox Press. We put out a lot of great books, including Ethics of Beauty. I record audiobooks for various Orthodox seminaries and monasteries, and I do some voiceover for some male spiritual development apps as well. And overall, we got a family here, and we just keep going one day at a time and make sure the farm runs smoothly, and praise God.
Yes, indeed. And we're going to talk about aspects of prepping. We were speaking offline, and Alex was saying how that can have a negative connotation. It hadn't struck me that it would, but now thinking about it, I guess I could see where some people would give that. Well, they'll think you're kind of some kind of lunatic, fringe, militia person, I suppose, in the middle of Iowa. Wait a second here. No. So we can go over some definitions of some things if Alex wants to start with that. But I would also ask Jonah, I know how we're going to kind of frame this with the spiritual context of orthodoxy. Do you want to get to that part first, or do we want Alex to give some definitions and then you jump into yours?
Let's start super meta and then work down.
Okay.
So we talk a lot about a lot of different, difficult things to hear on this podcast, our Patreon group, and just our group at large, and stuff like, I've got a little list here. Okay, so the possibility of having to worship underground. Okay, digital prisons, being banned from financial transactions, foreign land invasion, our children being drafted into unholy wars, the destruction of our purchasing power, 24/7 surveillance by malevolent government, food shortages, roving bands of hungry, malevolent, violent marauders, large-scale civil unrest and violence, forced like bioweapon injections, indoctrination of our children, the collapse of trust between our citizens, the dissolution of our nation, and the possibility of our own martyrdom. So when you hear about these things, and all of them, I mean, you can't say the chance of any of these is 0%, right?
Right.
And then you can get ourselves into certain perspectives to where we become convinced of the inevitability of one or more of those over X time scale that we're talking about. So it's really normal to ask yourself, now what? Right? It's like, that's completely normal to ask that. So, we could talk about, okay, develop your prayer rule, or get a ham radio license, or here's how to store potatoes, or buy some gold, or think about home invasion, or, so when you parse through all these possibilities, it's kind of like a disorienting fog. And Alex says this great thing, disorienting dilemma. I mean, it's such a good phrase. And so then how do you choose the right action? And then how do we even rank order those possibilities of disaster? So I kind of, like, my preference is like, what is the most important of all those? Well, I kind of think it's actually proposing that we actually get back on the same picture. So we know that there's a big debate over narrative right now, right? So we're between the press and between all of us as citizens. And so, some people say we're living like in the Matrix, right? And okay, but is that a life-giving narrative? That's a great social commentary,
Right.
but it's useful. Or like we're living in Terminator 2, or like my wife and I's favorite, we're living in Idiocracy, right? Like it's a really great commentary, but is that a narrative you can live within? So to kind of step back, it's like, what is our like cosmology as Orthodox Christians? Because we could easily choose any one of those, and a lot of people are, right? So whenever we hear about this difficult stuff about, all sorts of suppression and liberties and all this stuff, it's like, like we have to talk about what is creation. And then I think this is just evidence of the world we live in, is as Orthodox Christians, we have to step back that far in modern society to get back on the same page to where we can operate from a place of confidence, and faith, rather than fear or anger. Because it's easy to become fearful or angry about any of this stuff. So, can I talk about the cosmos?
Yeah, that'd be good.
All right. So I'll try to make this in a way that is relatable for this particular context, right? And still cover as many bases as we can in a very short, like just a few minutes. So, this is a really great way that St. Dionysius the Areopagite talked about creation. He said that God's beauty hovered over the abyss and darkness of non-being, and his beauty stirred the non-being so much to renounce itself that reached up and reached out into being. So being was called from non-being because of the beauty of the transcendent God. So that's like a beautiful start, right?
Yes.
To the cosmos.
Yes.
And so like likewise, man was born from this same upward reaching eros to unite with God. And so God united heaven and earth and breathed his spirit into us as incarnate spiritual beings who are like, what we're supposed to do is unite creation back to God in an ever deepening unity with God. Like that's why we're here. That's like the function, the purpose of humanity. But along the way, we started this pattern of, self-indulgence, self-importance, instead of unity with the cosmos. So now we fall passive to tendencies to indulge in anything other than God.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is an important part about passions, that these tendencies to fall passive to unholy desires are what we call our passions. So passivity and passion are just, they're the same thing. And, but God had compassion on us, and he desired to unite his creation back to him still. So he covenanted with us that we will find our rest in him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he actually says the cosmos, right? So the cosmos will find our rest in him. So then out of mercy for us, he had us leave the proximity of God in the garden, as well as perfection is like illumining light to anything pure. It's a consuming fire to anything impure. So
Right.
kind of an important distinction about God as light, right? Up until
Yes.
yesterday, light was fire. So
Right.
there's a proximity in which fire is burning or warming. And you can even be cold if you're not close enough. So he gave us this gift of repentance, which is the ability to seek a higher path and then reorient our attention back to him. So while we're still incarnate, that's the gift we have, is to choose a higher path. So here's an important thing about repentance too, that we might not think about growing up, is that it doesn't even require a prerequisite of sin. So, metanoia, higher mind, or like higher point of attention. So when we seek metanoia, we're just seeking a higher way, a higher point of attention. And so that, in fact, Dr. Tim in Ethics Beauty talks about this, that, non-being at the origin of creation actually repented into being. So repentance is just choosing a higher point of attention. So it's beautiful. I mean, yes, we're all sinners, and that's a dynamic as well. But that's what we're supposed to be doing, is repenting back to God. So now the invisible God united with human nature, and this is crazy. Like incarnation is crazy, right? All this stuff is crazy. He united with God. God and human nature became one in the person of Christ. And so ontologically, he united God and man, and he emptied himself for our benefit. So then he in emptying himself, he actually destroyed death and then opened the gate back to Eden. And so like now there's no barriers between us and back into Eden and the presence of God. So to the extent that we're able to offer up our impurities and then reorient back to God, we can unite with God once more. The only remaining barrier is our own will and the orientation of our hearts. So then now whether or not God's perfection feels like a burning fire,
Yes.
or a warm light, like softening us, that depends just how much of us is impure, which is the stuff that will burn on the fire, or pure, which we like warmly united in God's light. So this is what our reorienting our point of attention is for, so that when we're back in God's presence is a beautiful thing. So short thing about sins, they're the things that divert the path between humanity and God, or anything that divert the path of humanity from God, I guess. And they can be deliberate on our part or accidental. And I think this is a really important part about the modern situation. So, we and others can accidentally put others in despair or in temptations. And this is really common right now with all of our societal happenings, right? Domestic and abroad, because there's a handful of really intentional evil people. I don't know how many there are, but there's a handful of them. But then there's countless others who are simply in the grip of bad ideas. And they're just unintentionally spreading darkness. So I think that's a pretty good way to see it, that I've done that a lot in my life. I've just been under the wrong impression, and ended up hurting people. And the more I deep into my faith, the more I realize that I've hurt people without even knowing it. And so that's what's going on. That's a lot of what's happening right now. So one of our responsibilities as Christians is to respond to evil in the world and ourselves, both the intentional and the unintentional, and repent in the self-emptying act of orienting ourselves back to God. So, we good so far?
Yes, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, cool. We're getting close. So our passions can be understood as habitual patterns where we fall passive to darkness and self-delusion. And when we look back to God and offer our weakness and despair and confusion to him, we open ourselves for God to enter our souls and bodies. So that's we empty ourselves and there's room for God again. And so there's a synergy between God and ourselves, which is a furthering of God's incarnation, believe it or not. So whenever there's room for God in us, it's continuing God's incarnation in creation. So, and that's purifying in us. So that's God's fire and light is in you, right? Purifying you continually. So so when we live in synergy with God and we reorient our patterns back to unity with God, He's present in us, and our actions are actually God's energies. Okay, this is something that a lot of us didn't grow up with as well. So when His energies work through us, we call this virtue. Like a lot of the fathers call that virtue. And, we even think about there being several virtues, which are the energies of God in us. So St. Paul calls them the fruits of the Spirit, and a lot of people call them the virtues. Love, joy, peace, mercy, graciousness, goodness, belief, gentleness, self-control. So it's really crucial to see that because anything good is from God, that these good actions of ours are actually God's energies operative through us. And it's like a uniting that God wants with us. So that's part of why we're here, is to clear the way for God to act through us. So this is not good human work. This is God's energies as we get out of the way. So if we still our passivity to unholiness, to our passions, then we open our souls and bodies to God's energies. His perfect light and life are a light that illumines us and a fire that burns off further corruption in us. And, there's all these metaphors, right? Smelter burning off the impurities from gold.
Mm-hmm.
So the fire of God's perfection mingling with our own souls is what we call deification or theosis. And St. Athanasius the Great talked about putting iron in fire. So we're the iron and God is the fire. And when the two meet, the impurities are burned off. And the result is this red hot, malleable iron, which is like the unity of fire and iron. So, fire plus, it's just this red hot, radiant thing, which is the deified human living as he was built. And this is theosis, and the fathers tell us that it's actually like a process of uniting with God that has no ceiling. So while we'll never be God in essence, through our cooperative interpenetration, we can enter eternally deeper into unity with the transcendent origin of the cosmos.
Yes.
And this is the idea, it's so beautiful.
And if I can just say something really quick,
please.
So a person going, wow, this sounds a little bit deep. We can relate this to what he's saying. That natural, some people will say it's an emptiness or a hole to be filled within their soul and their heart and et cetera, et cetera. That is there because it's supposed to be filled with God. And oftentimes I've been extremely guilty of this through my life. We're trying to fill it with something other than that because we see these bright, flashy things and God seems nebulous, or we can't see him, or it seems not real, or you grew up hearing a silly definition, so it seems comical. Many such cases, and you fill it with something else. And so a lot of times in the let's say secular atheist world, you can see, look at 2020 and 2021, people were filling themselves with this irrational fear, and the same thing, going out and looking absurd in public because they're filling that space with fear rather than Christ. And so I just wanted to tack that on to Jonah's discussion, which I also found beautiful.
Can I add something to that, Buck? It's in addition to the fear, the anxiety, right, and trying to fill that empty hole with stuff, material stuff. I think it's this expectation that people have because we have lived in comfort for so long, to maintain that sense of comfort, right? To have freedoms and access and stuff and these assumptions that we make from day to day, that when you're faced with the struggle, you just immediately want to get rid of that struggle. You immediately want to get back to your comfort zone.
Yes.
And we saw that a lot in 2020. And so what Jonah's talking about is absolutely correct. I guess the thing that I've come to learn personally as well in a struggle that we're facing now in our family, a physical struggle that involves a lot of pain, physical pain, mental pain, right? With the individual, we're trying to understand how when something gets that bad, where is the good in it, right? How can this possibly be for any good of any kind? My wife's struggling with that. I'm struggling with that. And we as Orthodox know about and frequently speak about a podvig, right? Our spiritual struggle. Have you heard that term yet? But
Yes, from Father Turbo.
so it's yep. So it's laboring, spiritually laboring towards purification, right? Illumination, theosis, all those things that Jonah was talking about. And there are, maybe evangelicals might call it a cross to bear, right? But and like Saint Innocent, he talks about there being internal and external podvigs, right? So those things that are given to you by providence, those things that like a child having a disease, right, and a potentially terminal disease, or whatever illness you may have, or whatever experience you may have, an accident or something like that. But then there's your own internal crosses or external crosses that you can choose to try to bring into your own life to bring you closer to God, right? So that understanding of struggle and difficulty, I think, because we're talking prepping here, right? A lot of preppers want to avoid any pain or struggle, given all those things that they see coming down the road, right? The wars, the famines, the digital prison that's being built around us, which are all very real things. And we all can speak from our own experiences about those things. So, but we don't lose hope. We don't get anxious, and we don't put our hope into stuff either that we do or that we purchase in order to try to save us from potential discomfort. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yes.
Yeah. Well, this idea of sin as something that digresses us from God, we have to, if you have an instinct to think of things purely in a legal sense, that you've broken a law and that's what sin is, then it's complicated to think about that kind of suffering. Like, what have I done?
Yes.
Right? I didn't know I did anything wrong. And sin, and despair is a sin insofar as it's something that separates you from God. And so whenever we have these moments where we're so up against it and we are despairing, the only proper response is to self-empty. And that's crazy, but that's what Christ taught us. He taught us that the death is no more, and that he made death a creative act. And not just death of the physical, your body dying, but death in the sense of your childhood disappearing, your marriage falling apart, your bumped shin, you're losing your job, all these things. So the only proper response, at one level, we have to be careful about all of this. At one level, the only proper response is to empty yourself into that despair as a form of repentance, a seeking higher reorientation. Because whenever we're confronted with this dilemma, it means we're looking at something, it means we're seeing something we've never seen before. It's like a revelation of disaster. Like it's a revelation of darkness that we just didn't know was there. So we're becoming less naive in those. This stuff is bottomless.
Yes.
Bottomless.
Did you read a book called The Roots of Christian Mysticism?
I've got it. I haven't gotten away through it yet.
Okay.
Is that Olivier Clement?
I can't remember, but I learned of it from a nun that we both know. And some of the stuff that you started out with, it's touched upon in that book. And I thought, wait a second, maybe you've got that same book I got, the same suggestion.
I really like him.
Alex?
Olivier Clement.
Book, I just found a good quote, good prepper quote.
Okay.
Which doesn't make sense from your traditional prepping perspective, right? But from an Orthodox prepping perspective, makes a lot of sense. So Saint Sophronia of Essex said, sufferings bear so much fruit that if we were a little wiser, we would not want to come down from the cross. Meaning,
Wow.
if you're really wise, you understand the value that comes from suffering. And I think that's key to be able to prep. And I am, I'm not going to speak for Jonah. I see that there's practical value in prepping. I just think that the importance has to be your focus on why you're prepping. What's the intent of your prepping? Is it to preserve your way of life? Is it to preserve your luxuries so that you can have them when others don't because you're smarter and you've taken the steps and precautions to prevent yourself from losing them and those other fools have it? That's if that's your intention, those are the wrong intentions, clearly, right? If it's to help other individuals, given a crisis that comes up, a man-made or natural disaster of some kind, war, famine, or even a totalitarian state growing in strength and reaching its tentacles everywhere, right? Through digital media or whatever it is. It's important to understand that the focus and the intent is where the value lies. There's practical aspects of it. There's spiritual aspects of it. To me, again, I go back to this analogy of this situation with my family member. We go to the hospital, have to make decisions on medications. We have to sign waivers. We have pay very close attention to meds that are given or not given. And there's a whole lot of minutia that we have to deal with that's probably not really spiritual. But when you look at the whole experience on the whole, right, it's a part of this spiritual experience. It's a part of the podvig, right? And there's definitely spiritual aspects of what we're doing. We're praying. Hundreds of people are praying around the world, right? And with Diane, sometimes you don't see the immediate effects of those prayers. Oftentimes you don't see the immediate effects, and you don't necessarily see the effects that you're looking for. And it can be a struggling perspective. But there are practical and spiritual aspects of things, but as Orthodox Christians, we understand that they all are encompassed into a spiritual reality, okay, which is the most important reality, which is our primary reality, like Jonah is saying. So I think, for example, right now in Gaza, right, there's Adar and Itay Berchivsky. They were both the Israeli officers, the mother and the father, husband and wife, Israeli officers who had their household attacked by Hamas. And they killed 7 of them. They had rifles. They were trained. They were Israeli officers, and they killed 7 Hamas terrorists that were trying to kill them and kill their children or kidnap them or whatever they were trying to do. They put their kids into a safe room, basically. A mamad is what it's called, but they put them into a safe room. And their 10-year-old or 10-month-old twins lived. They survived Hamas's attacks. So clearly there's a physical reality to everything that's taking place, right? Or you look in Ukraine, there's these survivors of World War II, 92 years old, 88 years old women that are living alone in houses that have been shot up, and most of the village has left, and they're staying behind because they have nowhere to go, and they're surviving by eating potatoes and using the skills that they had learned growing up. Maybe surviving World War II, they're using them again today. So there's practical aspects of prepping that I think shouldn't be brushed aside. I think there is value in preparation, specifically when it's for your family or if it's for your community. In Gaza right now, there's St. Porphyrius. It's a Greek Orthodox church. The current church was built in 1100. The church before that was built much earlier. They are sheltering people right now. People are running to that church looking for food and shelter and safety, and they're not turning people back. They are Christians. They're Orthodox Christians, as St. Porphyrius, but they're also helping Muslims, right? So something tells me from the things I've read that just for food, water, right? So thank God it's there, right? Thank God someone had forethought. And I'm sure people living in Gaza, that's a part of their everyday life. Like, what are we going to do in the next lockdown, right? So I think they take precautions. And I don't see anything say about that. I don't see anything wrong with that. Possible good planning. Do something like that.
Let me
see if I can articulate like the question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. All right, Jonah, what were you about to say here?
Well, I wanted to see if I could articulate the question that we're getting at and see what you guys think about it. So I'll set it up with like the wrapping up of the cosmology with the so as we're repenting back to God and attempting to unite with him, to the extent that we can participate in the redemption of the cosmos, which is God's objective here with the fallen world, it's through our repentance for the world, through the Christian life, using the tools given to us by the church, like fasting, prayer, sacramental life, loving our neighbor, and repenting for the world. So, when the world is crazy, that's what we're supposed to do, right? That's what Christ did. Christ didn't sin at all, but he repented on the cross. He gave himself. So even of all the stuff, if you can find a way to do this, you have to think about it a little bit and spend some time with this idea. But when the world is crazy, you actually repent for it. Doesn't mean you're being like you're punishing yourself. It doesn't mean it's your fault. It just means that the only answer is to incarnate God more. That's the only answer, to the extent that we have any control over it. So like with our purpose to repent for the world and a life of piety and brotherly love, like how do we discern the proper action in like a hostile world? So like, it requires what the Bible and the fathers call nepsis, or awareness, or like discerning vigilance. And so as Christians, we don't fear physical death because we believe that we died at our baptism with Christ and we arose from the watery abyss with Christ in resurrection. So if you're baptized, that's what you signed on for, right? So you don't fear that. That's what happened. And so while we don't fear physical death, we really do deep work to discern like who we are, to learn God's will for us. And then we remain constantly vigilant about our souls and spiritual vitality. It's only through this spiritual vigilance that God's work of cosmic redemption can work through humanity in this beautiful synergy.
You guys have heard me talk about Texas independence before. Well, finally, we're having a conference about it. In Waco, Texas, just a few hours north of me here in Lockhart, November 9th through 12th, the Texas Independence Conference, also called TexitCon, if you will, organized, of course, by the Texas Nationalist Movement. They are bringing together top experts and influencers to discuss the future of Texit, politics, and self-determination. Among the list of speakers, I suppose not to be prideful or anything, but because you are listening to this show, your host and humble narrator, I will be one of the speakers here at TexitCon, along with, of course, the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement, Daniel Miller. We've got former state rep Kyle Biederman, Dr. Steve Turley, host of Turley Talks. Altogether, 52 expert speakers, 4 days long, and 46 sessions and panels. Again, it's texitconference.com. Go check it out. And guess what? I've got a code for you. If you type in BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout, it will get you a discount on your order, on your tickets. Join me. Let's hang out in Waco, Texas, the 9th through the 12th of November, the Texas Independence Conference, TexitCon. I can't wait to be there, and I hope to see you there. Let's do this.
So the operative question is not simply like, how do I protect myself and my family from looming evil? That's not the operative question. So it's much bigger than that. So the operative question is something like as a Christian, as an Orthodox Christian, to discern how to repent toward God, discern his will for me, and my role within the body of Christ, and to preserve the Christian life so that future generations will be able to participate in synergy with God for the redemption of the cosmos. So I don't know, that's kind of a long question, but it's like, for me, that kind of encapsulates what the project is here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you guys think about that?
Alex,
I think there's definitely spiritual. I think there's. Can you guys hear me okay now?
we got you.
I think there's definitely spiritual aspects of prepping. But if the question comes down to, given the state of the world today and what we see taking place, what should we be doing, right? How should we be preparing for the things we're seeing? Buck has had guests that come on that talk about, digital identities, CBD. They've spoken about transhumanism, right? They've spoken about some great discussions, especially the last one, Buck. It was awesome. But these are legitimate concerns that people have, and naturally people want to do something for it, right?
Yes.
And I don't think that desire to do something, that preparing, is necessarily bad or even not recommended. Okay. Well, there's plenty of examples, biblical examples, where people have taken precautions. The obvious ones, Joseph in Egypt, right? Preparing for the famines, right? Storing up things and preparing for famines. And that was direction given and wisdom and guidance given from God in doing so, right? So preparing in and of itself, again, is not wrong. The intent and the focus of your preparation is key. There's a spiritual aspect of it, definitely. There's a physical aspect of it.
Spiritual
There's a mental
foundation
aspect
for
of it. Yeah, there's a mental aspect of it, as we found out in 2020, right? Just that disorienting dilemma that we talk about, that realization that, holy crap, we may be chastised for our faith someday. Oh, wait a minute. All of history, through all of history, Christians have always been ostracized, depending where and when. But there's been a lot of that's taken place under communism most recently. So the preparation has practical aspects of it. There's physical preparation, mental preparation, and definitely spiritual preparation. I think we've been speaking a lot in this discussion about the spiritual preparation, which underlies everything, and it is what we're all about, right? Because it doesn't matter how many beans you have. If a tidal wave comes and washes your house away, those beans ain't going to help you. Like a lot of people find out in Florida all the time, right? If you've stored up things and CBDC comes in and you can't pay for your property taxes each year because you're not a part of the system, you might lose your property and everything that you put together from a prepping perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the realities that you have to come to terms with. There's a mental component of it, but there's definitely a spiritual component of it, right? The struggles, how you deal with struggles, how do you approach struggles? Why are we dealing with struggles? All those things, the spiritual aspects are essential. And I think that's what's lacking for the millions of people in the United States, the numbers that they say are growing. And a lot of these sites you can find on YouTube and everywhere else, preppers talking and providing information and telling you what product to buy because they're trying to pitch something and they get a free sample of it, So I think what we've been talking about is crucial. I think there are a lot of your listeners, Buck, have asked, specific questions because we've heard them in the Patreon session. I think Jonah has some really good insights. I think I've got some good insights. I would be willing to share those if you want.
Yeah, certainly. Yep. You cut out just a little bit there, but yes. Let's get into some of those suggestions then.
Where do you want to start, Jonah?
Well, I guess, before we get into, what kind of liner to put in the ground to store your ammo, sort of stuff. Yeah. The point being, like Alex is just saying, if your beans wash away in a hurricane, if you don't have a spiritual understanding of what just happened, not that you have to master any of that. I just mean that they have some sort of fortitude. Your reaction is not, why me? Because we could all do this why me thing right now. It's kind of an Olympic sport right now. And so the fact that we all have reason to say why me, we have to orient towards things differently. And whenever we get hit with something or we choose to do something difficult, that's clearly our choice to go off the beaten path, we have to recognize that there's a fortitude and a foundation that we're working from that is life-giving and not just simply countercultural. And that'll make us vain. So I don't know, having said all that, from that foundation, we've got, all multiple water sources and water filters and, pantry full of seeds that we save and meat and veggies and all sorts of approaches to all of that stuff. Is kind of, how do you start with that? What do you think, Buck?
Yeah, that's some of the, I suppose, material information that people also want to hear, other than just the spiritual's a foundation, and then it comes down to when it hits the fan, it's like, what stuff do I need to say? What do I need to let go? I think something that people don't often think about is, who should I be helping around me? And maybe it's recency bias. I just moved into a cul-de-sac and it's a single mom next to me with 4 kids. And so I immediately would think of all right, we'll get her and the kids over here, that kind of thing. Also, yes, freezers, food, ammo, cash, I suppose, silver, gold, wheat. These are the things that you hear about a lot, but I'll let you guys jump on. And for my people listening, Jonah has straight up moved onto a farmland from what was called a fairly big city. So he's kind of experienced doing this in real time. And I know Alex lives outside of the city as well.
I would say, Buck, that what people need to determine first is where they at, right? What resources are available to them? Do they want to be in that situation? Everybody has to think about prepping from the perspective of where they're at, right? So, are you single? Are you married? Do you live in the city? Do you live in the suburbs, right? What resources do you have available to you? If you live in the city, is it a city you want to be in when a crisis happens? A lot of people recommend to just hunker down to survive a crisis, depending how bad it is. Because the doomsday scenarios that everybody likes to think about and the stupidity of the zombie apocalypse as being the standard from which you have to judge your level of preparedness is, I don't think, practical, and I don't think it's healthy either. You can spend a lot of money very quickly on prepping materials, and I don't encourage that. I don't recommend people buy a year's supply of prepackaged food, okay, because it's ridiculously expensive. It's
very salty.
Very, very salty. That's what I was going to say. Very salty, very sugary. And if you haven't tried it, I know a priest, actually, that you introduced me to, Jonah, that was in a group that was doing that. They bought up all kinds of supplies and were planning to go down to, I think, Chile, because they saw the state of the world and were concerned about it. And they decided they just couldn't do that. They said, well, let's try the food that we were storing up. And it tasted like crap. So they realized they would have been really miserable had they, and some of it had spoiled as well. So I guess you have to assess where you're at and what your requirements are from a prepping perspective. So Buck was talking a little bit earlier about having neighbors who he knows that if there was a crisis, he'd want to help. That's great. Our parish, our priest understands the value in taking measures that if people do flee to the church and look at it as a refuge, we're going to have resources available for our community, should the need arise. So, a lot of preppers talk about bug out bags. I'm not opposed to leaving the location where you're at, especially if you are in a designated smart city or a very soon to be 15-minute city. I highly encourage you to look at ways that you can get out of that environment. And I'll tell you, because I also live on an acreage, Jonah does too. I know that at the height of COVID, when there was madness in the cities where we were living and working, when we came home to our acreage at night, the neighbors were nice and normal. We didn't have prying eyes, worried about us being outside, ratting us out to the authorities, none of that. So I think there's definitely value in being in a rural setting. Definitely value in having an acreage, being able to drop some seeds, grow things. But that's a long distance off for a lot of beginning preppers. They just get overwhelmed when they think about everything that has to go to. You mean I got to buy land? You mean I got to buy weapons? I don't know how to shoot a weapon. Well, if you don't know how to handle a weapon, you may as well not buy it, okay? Unless you're going to trade it, because it's not going to do you much good. In the Army, we have a saying, train as you fight. And even if you have weapons and ammo, if you don't use it, if your family doesn't know how to use it, I'm sorry, it's not going to come in very handy, except maybe from an investment perspective in the future, right? So I guess I just wanted to start out with that to assess where you're at, but understand that there are basics. There's food, right? Which I personally think legumes are a great way to store food. They're high in protein, beans. They're high in protein. Beans, lentils, peas, they can store for 20 years if you're putting them in the right containers with some oxygen absorbers and some water absorbers. So I'm a big fan of that. Providing for yourself, for your family. If you can do it for 3 months, do it for 3 months. If you can do it for 6 months, do it for 6 months. If you can do it for a year, do it for a year. Water definitely is a primary requirement. Shelter, right? Protection. Something a lot of people don't think about is strength in numbers, which is why, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, I really emphasize the value of community and being a part of a close-knit community of individuals that are like-minded individuals that work together, right? There's a lot of practical reasons why that's great, because if we have another lockdown and we choose to worship, you want to be with people who are going to be willing and able to worship, right? There's the food, the water, the shelter, the safety, the security. People are great for that. Then there's also the ability to worship. And Jonah's really good about this. He's put a great physical little system together. And he also turned me on to the Anthologian. You want to talk to them about what you have at your own to do typicas or to do the hours and how important that is as an Orthodox Christian, Jonah?
Yeah. So, Bucky talked about getting to know your neighbors, and that's a great place to start, because there is strength in numbers. And the idea of self-sufficiency is a delusion at best. And it could just be downright, it could be driving evil malevolence for some people as well. So we're not self-sufficient. We are communal beings who exist in relation to one another, and get to know your neighbors. Just, if you don't know them, go over there. And then as we deepen these bonds, this is not purely a utilitarian, practical reason, but learn to pray with your neighbors. That's a really big ask. I get that. And especially for some people, it's a really big ask. But when Christ told you to love your neighbor and you're wondering who he's talking about your neighbor, like your actual neighbor. And go shake their hand. And you kind of have these homie moments, right? You have like a homie nod where it's like, okay, well, I've had these with various people throughout town. So you have a short discussion. You can kind of go, I see. So if the school board does such and such, we're together, right? Just that itty bitty little bit is super valuable. And when it comes to the home worship aspect, the church has always been preserved through laity. And so the presumption of, that I can't speak completely wholesale, of course, but the assumption in the Orthodox tradition is that the bishops will go corrupt. I'm not saying that they all will go corrupt. I'm just saying that live your life. That in Galatians, it talks about how your leaders are going to be held accountable for how they lead. Now, we are to be vigilant and follow their guidance, and they will be held accountable for that. So that's what they stepped into as being a leader. But it's at home. There's times whenever we can't worship for whatever reason. You're sick, or the government shuts down your church, or whatever it is. Then you it's important to be able to already know how to worship from home. And this can just be getting your Chotki out and saying, Lord, have mercy with your kids. That's beautiful. And then there's all the way up until there's some days, I'm pretty sure, in the Orthodox tradition where there are more hours of service than there are hours in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like there's so much there. So one really great resource that just came out from St. Ignatius Orthodox Press in Zeeland, Michigan, is called the Anthologian. And this is something that in the old country, this would often be the only book that a mission would have or a parish would have. They couldn't afford the library of liturgical texts that are required for a full set of services. And what it is the reader services, which reader service just means services you can do without a priest. You and your buddies, you and your family, you and your neighbors can do these services. And it's a really neat resource. It's bigger.
I'll second that.
It's 1,000
blown away by
pages.
it.
Yeah, I don't have one here in front of me, but it's as big as, it's as big as that, it's not, it's, and 1,000 pages. So that's about the same thickness. And it's probably the last prayer book you'll ever need, unless you have a hobby of getting new ones, and that's fine too, and always experimenting with different ones. But so what the Anthologian is it enables you at home to do a whole bunch of different services. I don't know how familiar all of you all are with the different services, but there's services for like every hour of the day, literally. And so it enables you to do those if you want to, or just do morning prayers and evening prayers with your kids. And if you don't have access to a priest or you can't make it to your parish or your monastery, then there's something called Typica, which is basically kind of like, is a service you would do without a priest. There's no Eucharist, but it feels like a divine liturgy in a certain way. It's a very valuable resource. And if failing that, as people don't have to be into these really wild assembling of services, and that book makes it easy if you're into that. But just get a simple prayer book, learn the Jesus prayer, and with your neighbors. Even my situation is that we're the only Orthodox household probably about 60 miles.
Wow.
And so we travel about an hour and 20 minutes to a monastery, Holy Archangel Michael and All Angels Skeet. And it's such a blessing to be a part of that community. And we're there as much as we possibly can, which is, this time of year, we can't make it every single weekend. But point being that at home, we rely on services at home. So we've got a nice, a prayer corner and a little prayer corner that works for us. And we have friends that we can invite for, like I said, these are not Orthodox Christians, but these are some of your friends who are maybe they don't have to necessarily be that ortho curious. We live in a place where like everyone calls themselves a Christian, basically. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily cool with, prostrations in front of the Theotokos or there's some things that are a little different for Protestants primarily, right? And some more than others. So, but there are prayers that the church gives us which are completely beautiful for non-Orthodox Christians. There's a thing called an akathist, which is basically a long prayer with some repetitive parts that they give you this image of theology, this image. It's so beautiful. And there's one called the akathist of the glory to God for all things.
Yes, that's a good one.
And so wonderful. And no one's going to get bent out of shape. So that's that side. I don't want to dominate with that, but I think that's worth looking into for people. Get to know your neighbors. Yeah.
Yes. And to speak on that home reader service type thing, I'm failing to remember it, but just on my episode 2 shows ago with Father John Whiteford, I am pretty certain towards the end, he said that he has published a video series on how to do reader services. I will research that and put it in the show notes for this episode if I can find that.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Alex, go ahead.
Go
ahead, Jonah. We don't want to cut you out.
Alex, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say, our faith is rich with examples of people who live through difficult times. We have the martyrs, we have the saints, right? We have all those people that we can look to as examples for how to handle a crisis, right? And I have a good Orthodox priest friend, Father Pan, up in Montana, and when I was doing research for the book on prepping, I asked him, what are we supposed to do when our neighbor comes, knocks on our door, and realizes that they need something that we have, or they assume that we have, maybe they don't know, how are we supposed to deal with that as a Christian? And he said, Alex, he's like, the answer would be you would help them and give them some of what you have, right? Honestly, you don't know how you're going to respond until that moment comes, right? So that's important to do what Father Turbo talks about. You've probably heard this, Buck, to establish your red lines. Like, what will you be willing and able to do in a crisis? What will you not do in a crisis? At what point are you going to become a martyr, right? Potentially, and try to think of those red lines ahead of time, right? I'm pretty certain that if it becomes illegal to worship and pray, I'm pretty sure Father Turbo is going to continue to pray, right? I don't want to get him in trouble, but I think most people could count on that, right? He wouldn't be one of those. He wouldn't be like the bishops that shy away from their spiritual obligations, right? So, you ought to have him talk about it, but he has drawn those red lines. He knows what those lines are and what he's not willing to cross should the time come up. I've got the same sort of things with my family. We've talked about what it means to be a martyr, and it's very difficult to talk about that because people are going to think, if you talk about it publicly, they're going to think you're nut, right? A jihadist of some kind. But it doesn't necessarily mean violence. What it means is, what are you willing to stand up for? What are you willing to sacrifice potentially yourself for, right? And the difficult part as a parent is children. What will you teach them about what they're willing to stand up for? So these are discussions it's worth having now, before the crap really hits the fan, whatever it is, and try to address those things. Then there's we're to be as clever as serpents and innocent as doves, right? So if I'm a prepper, if I have supplies, if I live on an acreage, and somebody comes to my house, it may be a little surveillance, a little reconnaissance, a little probing effort, right? To say who is here, how many part, or whether we because the dog probably won't come knocking on your door asking what kind of goods you got, right? He might send someone in who's smaller, who's more scared of him, and we can influence to do that sort of thing. And maybe you say the most that you have is whatever sustenance you have, and maybe you pre-position it somewhere on your property to where people can go get access to it. It's a little bit. It's nothing that they're going to be, thinking is the greatest food in the world, but it's sustenance of some kind. Maybe you do that. Maybe on your property you have a little portion, little apple trees or something. That my parents grew up in war-torn Europe, and they talked about surviving as they were walking across Europe, right, as displaced persons. Ending up in refugee camps, and food on the side of the road, orchards, abandoned orchards, things like that. That sustained a lot of people. So, you can think about those things, and try to be clever ahead of time, but still fulfill your obligations as a Christian, right?
Yes.
One thing that a really good use of money, and I'm kind of a threadbare kind of guy, but I would advocate spending money on a good collection of Lives of the Saints.
Yeah.
There's some good ones. There's the Prologue of Ochrid, which is 2 heavy volumes. There's a Synaxaria, the 7 volumes. There are others, but spend the money that kind of hurts a little bit, but you can pull it off and get a nice volume, because the reading the Lives of the Saints shows us how to live the gospel in all these situations that Alex is talking about and more. And if I were, if traumatized by something, it means that we had kind of a revelation of darkness that we just didn't know was out there. And so it's good to try to acclimate yourself to this. Things are dark, and reading the lives of the saints and came out golden, and I don't necessarily mean materially, but
Right.
you see the way the Orthodox Church talks about the saints, you see that they're the beauty that they have accumulated through their lives. I would be a big advocate of that. As far as like the martyrdom stuff, this is interesting because talk is cheap, right? And I kind of think that when it comes to, I hope I didn't describe the cosmology insofar as like there's no violence and everybody's happy and cheery. That's not the case. There's evil floating around out there, and the way our biggest weapon is peace, which is crazy, but peace is a weapon that blocks the gates of evil from your heart. And if you can wield that weapon, you first have to cultivate it. If you can cultivate that and wield that, then you will be protected from evil. But I'm talking about in your heart. So that's independent of material actions. So Christ talks about nonviolence. And in the Bible, we have, Judas Maccabeus slaying Gentiles in preservation of the Israelite way of life. And it's hard to talk about. Alex, you'd have a different perspective on this perhaps, but it's like when it comes to warriors, we have a long tradition of warrior saints. Saint Minas,
Yes.
Saint Demetrius,
Yes.
Saint George. These are incredible men. And these are warriors. These were in the military and they slayed people. Okay. So this is difficult to talk about this stuff. The only thing I could really say for anybody who's interested in that, if you are a warrior, you probably know that about yourself. Talk with other like-minded people and talk with them about it. Because once again, despair and confusion are sins that we can inflict upon people
Yes.
by getting too crazy and heavy-handed about stuff.
Yes.
Alex, you're trained. Buck, you're trained in intense scenarios, and not everyone. I don't know. It's just it's a difficult thing to talk about because so even in the story of Judas Maccabeus and the Maccabeans, there was a lot of death going on in God's name, right? And at the same time, this is really relevant to the Maccabees story that Judas Maccabeus, Romans. So they're being defeated. And then he saw a way out by allying with the non-Israelite occupying force. So he allied with them because he discerned that it was going to be acceptable. So all these images we have of this tyrannical government and tyrannical organizations and corporations, those exist. And I'm not saying just ally to whoever. I'm just saying that, as Alex pointed out, you're not going to know what's going to happen until you're in that situation. Just prepare yourself spiritually, develop peace, develop your prayer rule, love your neighbors. And if you're a warrior, talk with other warriors. Don't go freaking people out about
and I would
wielding my guns all willy-nilly.
I would certainly stay away from anyone. If all it took was 2020 and 2021 for someone to reveal themselves as, let's say, not a warrior or more of a tattletale or someone who wanted to essentially work as an arm of the state for free to get you in trouble, now you at least know who to not go to and to stay away from and to not trust, because that was just a blip on a radar of sorts, and that didn't take much to turn a lot of people coward. Sorry to say that, but
2020 was a blessing. 2020 was a blessing.
Yes,
we learned a lot. We learned a lot.
Age of revelation. I said I would only keep you guys about an hour, and we're at an hour 10. Could you both give like a closing message of what we've kind of discussed? And of course, y'all are my friends. We can have this episodes many other times, and I think we will. But I'll let you go first. Alex, I'll let you go first, just in case you have to skedaddle. But
is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess the point I would say about prepping, once again, just to sort of summarize, it's very easy to get anxious. It's very easy to get carried away when you take a look at the state of the world. Just understand that nothing is new under the sun. Okay, well, while AI is new, okay, but the sins that come from technologies,
That's right.
right, from AI will probably be very, very similar to a lot of other sins that we've already experienced. So I would say, you have to come to terms with and fully grasp and accept, hit the I accept button, that there's a good chance there will be trauma in the next few years. There may be ostracization. There may be persecution of us as Christians, as conservatives, whatever it is. We may have an outside force invading us. The dollar may go to crap. It may not. We may be alive and 20 years from now saying, what the heck did we have that podcast for? Because really nothing's happened. I don't personally foresee that happening, but it's a possibility, right? So,
but we got beans.
You take steps, you take measures. We got beans and we got water. You take steps, you take measures, practical measures, but you never lose sight of the spiritual focus that you should have as you're prepping. It's not about you and your stuff. It's about you helping other people, helping your community, your local community, your parish community. It's developing skill sets that people will need in a time of crisis. It's, being physically healthy and toughening yourself up even, okay? There's a lot of value to physically toughening yourself up, mentally toughening yourself up, and spiritually through fasting, through prayer, through denying yourself things, and through carrying your cross, your podvig, right? So that's all I would say is don't get carried away. Make it a normal part of your life. Focus on others. Focus on helping others as you go through it. Try not to spend too much money and do what you're able to. If you're in an apartment in the middle of a city and that's where you're at this point in life, okay, focus on what you can. That would be my recommendation.
Jonah?
Yeah, so to the extent that we will rely on our bonds with other people and our own sense of spiritual fortitude, but I would say if there's something that you need to work on now, like if it's your marriage, if it's your you eat too much expensive food, if it's you need to develop your prayer rule, or you probably should fix your will was broken, you need to rewire it. Like, just do that. This is the right time to do that. Not in a frenzied freak out state, but this is how I look at it. Like with the revelations with all the stuff that went down the last few years, we are given permission and encouragement to be the person that we are. Then that's freedom, like to be the person that you are, and without trying to conform to societal structures, because culture is here to provide a structure that we can live within to civilize us, but it has failed in many respects. So now, if you ever need a permission to consider something a little bit off the beaten path, without being a wacky, be prayerful and careful, and pursue who you really are. And that's where I would start, because now's the time. I mean, without being all freak out about it, if there's something you need to work on, do it now. And when it comes to home study stuff, if people are into that, there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of books, a lot of YouTube videos. I started working with this company called Exodus 90 and Exodus90.com. And they have this like fraternity of, basically, it's an app where you participate in developing your prayer rule fraternity with guys, and you isolate some stuff you need to work on. And then you do that in a fraternal situation. And it's pretty amazing what those guys can do. It's just, it's what you do in fraternity with people. It's a good practice run. You should develop that locally. You should have that with your neighbors. You should have that with your family. And we live in a pluralistic society, so it's not like we're all going to be, processing around the courthouse with our Byzantine 3-bar crosses. But you can and you should if you feel compelled to do that, and people will join you. That's all I got. As far as the physical stuff, there's so many resources available for you to learn how to dig a well and milk goats.
Yes, you know what you should do, Jonah, is plug the website for y'all's online sales.
Oh yeah, we are at holdfastfarmstead.com. If you're looking for a low input, parasite resistant meat goat, look no further. We've been working on our herd for several years, and we have a really great herd of goats. If you look to stock your own instead with some, they don't ship that easy, but we can work something out. Also, we can make, my wife's got a really big garden. I just put in a greenhouse, extremely healthy, extremely nutritious, and they're extremely healthy. They're not, really, it's just vegetables. And you can live off vegetables for a long time. But you should grow potatoes, grow your own garden, do that. If you got a space, you got a corner you got a windowsill, you can grow some herbs. Just do that. It's good for you. You start to learn a little bit about what makes the grass grow, and you get better at it over time.
Talk about your freeze-dried food.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got freeze-dried food. Well, my wife's really running the show right now. She's been doing a great job. She's been making, we grew a whole bunch of cherry tomatoes, and we've been freeze-drying those, and they're amazing. You could rehydrate them to make sauces or just eat them like snacks. We make sauces out of them all the time, or put them in eggs. We do a lot of freeze-dried duck eggs, and it's kind of crazy. You freeze-dried duck eggs when they're raw. Well, you whisk them up, freeze-dry them, and then they're like powder. And they're just powder, and they stay dry. And, of course, they'll stay dry on their shelf for 10, 20 years perhaps. And then you get them out, and then you put it in a bowl, stir in some water, and it's raw egg. It's totally crazy. The freeze-dry stuff's pretty interesting. So you can have,
Wow.
Yeah.
That is ducking crazy.
Duck eggs are, they're a great resource. And lots of stuff like that. Herbs, that kind of stuff. But, learn to grow some sweet potatoes.
Yep. Cool. Well, as always, thanks to both of y'all for being on the show. And I thought this was a good one. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, had a good time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Buck.
So I told you up top, this was initially done as a Zoom call last month with my hardcore supporters. You too can become one of these supporters by going to patreon.com/counterflow and becoming a donor of $5 a month or more if you'd like. And it gets you into these every month. We have one. As this drops, we just had one last night with Father Deacon Ananias, friend of the show. He's been on before. A lot of you guys like him. So that's kind of the type of people we're getting. Our friend Cyprian's been there before. Of course, these guests today on the show, Alex and Jonah, have been there before. We've had Father Turbo. We've had David Patrick Harry. And so this is the kind of discussions we like to have. These are the kind of guests I like. And I always tell y'all, but if you're new to this show, every month we do it, and it's private. It's not recorded. It's not posted anywhere. It's a discussion amongst y'all, myself, and the guest for about 2 hours. And it's really open to all of you, whatever you'd like. Again, we can say whatever we want without being censored. It's a really wonderful time. And let's see. Subscribe to the YouTube page. These drop every Tuesday. They premiere live at 7 p.m. Central on the YouTube page. And if you subscribe, you should get the notification to tune in, and I'm often there in the live chat as they debut. I love doing that. What else? Follow me on Twitter @BuckRebel, BuckRebel. And until next week, you guys have a great one. We'll see ya.
You get split in half, till I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.